Here I am at Classic FM. It says someone made an algorithm that turns your name into a musical cipher. And if we scroll down, we can type in our own name here. And we'll just type in Davenport, Iowa. In music, a motif, also known as motive, is a short musical phrase, a salient, reoccurring figure, musical fragment, or succession of notes that has some special importance. Bach was one of the first to cipher his name, B-A-C-H, into his music. Today, we're going to start at St. Anthony's Catholic Church, located in Davenport, Iowa. St. Anthony's Catholic Church is a parish church in the Diocese of Davenport. It is the first church congregation organized in the city of Davenport and the second Catholic congregation after St. Raphael's in Dubuque in the state of Iowa. The parish buildings were listed on the National Register of Historical Places as St. Anthony's Roman Catholic Church Complex in 1984. In 1832, on what is now the city of Davenport, Chief Keokuk of the Sauk tribe signed a treaty with the United States government after the tribe's defeat in the Black Hawk War. Anton Leclerc, who served as the translator at the treaty signing, received 2 parcels of land. The original section of the city was laid out in 1836. The next year, an addition was made to the small town on one of Leclerc's parcels. He stipulated that a Catholic church be built on one of the squares. The same year, a frontier missionary, Reverend Samuel Charles Mazzucchelli, arrived in Davenport and started the parish. At that time, there were 25 Catholics in a town of 100 people. And who would have thought a small town of 100 people would grow to be something like this just 50 years later, with buildings like these, and this, and this. It continues to say he drew up plans for a simple 2-story structure that would serve as a church and a priest's residence. Ground was broken for the new church on April 27, 1838, and it was built by pioneer settlers Adam Noel, John Noel, and Joseph Noel, with assistance from Harvey Leonard for $2,000. The first bricks manufactured in the city of Davenport were used to build the church. The church was dedicated in May 23, 1839. The building served many purposes for the small community. It was a church, city hall, courthouse, schoolhouse, public forum, and gathering place for the citizens of the town. The church's bell called parishioners to the mass, children to school, sounded the alarm for a fire, as well as summoning the city's aldermen for their sessions. The parish's first pastor was a French missionary priest recruited by Bishop Lores, the Reverend Jam. And it appears as Mr. Jam has his hand in something. But what that is, I can only speculate. Either way, he served the parish until 1868, when he remained in his native France while he was visiting there. St. Anthony's School opened in 1839 with Jam as its teacher. Initially, classes were taught in the body of the church with a curtain closing off the sanctuary. The most prominent pupil to be educated at St. Anthony's in its early years was John Forrest Dillon. Why yes, Mr. John Dillon, I remember you. The church is designed as a cruciform, not an uncommon shape for a Roman Catholic church. I'm over here at the Wikipedia, and we're looking at cruciform. Cruciform means having the shape of a cross or a Christian cross. We can look under the contents, and we see cruciform, architectural plan. We also see cruciform DNA, cruciform joint, cruciform manuscript, cruciform melody, which is rather interesting, cruciform tail, cruciform sword, and a few others. And let's move on to the Christian Science in Davenport, Iowa. It says in 1879, after her discovery of the spiritual laws that heal disease as well as sin, Mary Baker Eddy and a small group of her students founded a church based on the words and works of Jesus and designed to restore the lost element of healing to Christianity. Today, that church is known as the Mother Church, the First Church of Christ, Scientist in Boston. And just look at this. Absolutely incredible. I cannot fathom the amount of horsepower that went into building such an enormous structure. Just completely unbelievable. And this Mary Baker Eddy is a entirely different research project in itself. Maybe for another time. Here we have a photo of her son, George Washington Glover II. The first regular meeting of those interested in Christian Science was held on Sunday, May 31st, 1891, in the little old Newcomb Cottage, which was later a residence at 122 West 7th Street. Later, services were held in room 21 at the old Masonic Temple at 3rd Street and Main. In room 21 of that old Masonic Temple, 1 year later, on May 31st, 1892, First Church of Christ Scientist was organized. Services were held at this old Masonic temple until the move in 1895. And I'm glad I found this webpage from Christian Science in Davenport, Iowa, because if I hadn't, I would have not known about this old Masonic temple, and it's hard to find any more information on this temple. I was beginning to think that Mr. Jam had stashed away any photos remaining of this Masonic temple, and then I found this, a postcard, which I found on hippostcard.com. And excuse my horrible reading, but I will do my best. It says, "Dear Born, your good letter and Easter greetings read merry thanks. I shall want to know the sequel of the tale. Lovingly, both well. Ian P. Rice." And maybe that's a cue. And this was published in Rock Island, Illinois. And here we have another. And we can see horse and buggy out here. And here I am back at Ted's Vintage Art. And here we can see, if we look on 3rd Street, 3rd and Main that is, that we can see the Masonic Temple right here. Now, according to the narrative, this was built after the church, which is right here. When exactly was this temple built? I do not know. I can only speculate. Or why such a great building would be torn down and not repurposed for something else. As it sits today, you'd never even know it was there. I'm here on the Facebook under Davenport, Iowa history, and it says this new Masonic temple was 8 years old in the making. It began in 1915 when the fraternity decided on a new home outside of the business loop and bought the old Trinity Church. Other purchases were made from time to time. Thereafter, in 1919, the Masons were ready to begin work. The members of the board and the architects left no stone unturned that might aid them in the constructing of an ideal temple. They studied the needs of various orders, their current membership, and future possibilities of growth. They also took into consideration the needs of the city, its lack of a large auditorium for general organization purposes, the necessity of a large dining room, and arrangements for several huge crowds. Every city in the country that had recently erected a large Masonic temple was visited, among them Detroit, Toronto, Arkin, Fort Wayne, Cleveland, Buffalo, and Grand Rapids. The excavation took a long period of time to complete, as foundations of tremendous strength and carrying capacity were necessary. This can be understood and emphasized when one realizes that the engine room lies 30 feet below the surface of the alley between Main and Brady Streets. The $1 Million Temple featured an auditorium that sat more than 3,000, and the completed facility was proclaimed the finest of its kind in all of Iowa. On another post from Davenport, Iowa history over on the Facebook, we read a little more about Trinity Church, one of the earlier landmarks of Davenport. It says for years the church had been known for its chimes, but in 1923 they were forever replaced by the chimes of the huge pipe organ installed in the new temple. The stone that Trinity Church was built was crushed and used in the concrete for the new structure. Even the name of the old church was preserved in the building that superseded it, as one of the Masonic bodies to be housed in the temple was Trinity Lodge. And for those of you who have seen Exploring History, Davenport, Iowa, Part 1, you'll know that the Palmer University now owns this Masonic Temple. And I found a blog post on blogs.palmer.edu about the Serbia family, and I thought it was relevant to explain the people and the times and what they were living in back then. It says, we recently had a request concerning the Serbia family legend. In the 1922, Australians Mac and Dorothy Serbia traveled across the United States from Seattle to Davenport, Iowa, to visit B.J. Palmer at the Palmer School of Chiropractic with a two-wheel cart carrying their children and belongings. They sold postcards and poems to newspapers and local people to fund their trip. One of the poems is as follows. We're on our way to see B.J. B.J. of Davenport. His hair is long and his whiskers are short. If you haven't seen B.J., you ought. B.J. B.J. of Davenport. For this world may thank B.J. He paved the chiropractic way, while the old-style humbugs sneer and snort. We'll yell B.J. of Davenport. So this gentleman right here and his lovely wife took his two children 2,500 miles, wheeling them in this cart, totaling 221 days on a trip from Seattle to Davenport to see B.J. Palmer. What an adventure that must have been. And I was looking for more historical maps of Davenport, Iowa, and I came across this at worldmapsonline.com. And I understand this is a drawing of Davenport, Iowa, and its layout, but I wanted to have a look around to see what the artist was trying to say. And we see a park down here. But if we look way up on the hill, these trees right here caught my attention. And there's 7 of them. And obviously the artist knows about perspective, because they drew other trees that were not so tall. Federer Park is located in the west end of Davenport, Iowa, United States. The 75-acre park is dominated by rolling green grassed hills and trees. It features playground equipment and an aquatic center. The property for Federer Park was given to the city by Celestine Federer, a daughter of Nicholas Federer. He was a Hungarian nobleman who came to Davenport as a refugee in 1853, following the failure of an insurrection in his native Hungary. The park was the site of Federer's estate. He chose the location for his home because the steep bluffs with a view of the Mississippi River, and it reminded him of his home. The house, which was on the site at the time of the donation, is now gone. All that remains of the building is a carriage barn. A municipal zoo was added to the park in 1909. It became known as Mother Goose Land. Patrons would enter the zoo through a large Mother Goose structure, like you'll see here, and it's still there today. There was also a feature called Monkey Island. The Mother Goose entryway was listed on the Davenport Register of Historic Properties in 2007, and the zoo itself closed in 2008. I'm here now at the Quad City Times, and I found a Q&A about Nicholas February, and it said, what was his estate like? Answer: he built a mansion of red bricks. Clay for the brick came from the site. Imagine that. The 21-acre estate had vineyards, an orchard, arbors, and a running brook. Sounds quite beautiful. Initially, February's home was converted to an inn, but it was torn down in late 1933 or 1934, we are not sure, according to a brochure published by the now defunct February Zoological Society, a support group. The home stood where the parking lot for the swimming pool is now. Now, I can't find too much information about Mr. February, but I did find a grave.com, and it says that Nicholas February left Hungary to flee the oppression that resulted from the failed revolution to overthrow the country in the 1840s. It is said that his financial means was a sack filled with gold that he hand-carried, as would I. It says Nicholas was fluent in several languages and worked as a lawyer. He built his fortune by buying over 3,000 acres of land in surrounding counties from the government and then selling it at a huge profit. And it continues to say his estate was left to Scott County, Davenport, Iowa, which today amounts to more than $1 million in a trust that is used to fund college scholarships for students needing educational assistance. And what a time to be alive, to flee your country and have your choice pick of 75 acres overlooking the Mississippi, using just the clay on your own property to make the bricks and build your mansion, bringing in not so ordinary animals. It reminded me of the Serbia and his family and the trip they took to Davenport 69 years later in 1922.